So here's the question that I'm approaching you with today. What is a podcast in 2025? What does that word even mean these days? Believe it or not, or maybe you already know this is something that people argue about, at least in podcasting forums online. Not really me. I tend to sit on the sidelines of these arguments, but I am here for the conversation and I'm going to use it as a starting point for sharing my opinions, which is what I do. I think that there are probably two main schools of thought on this question. First is that podcasts always and only refer to audio-only content that is delivered by what is called an RSS feed. RSS feed, RSS feed. The other one is podcasts are whatever people think they are in 2025. So let's start with a little bit of a vocabulary lesson. Where does the word podcast even come from? It is a portmanteau, which is a fun word, credited to journalist Ben Hammersley. If you're asking yourself, what in the world is a portmanteau? Well, kids, that's a French word for when we squish two other words together to make a new word. All right, so pod and cast. The words that Ben smushed together are iPod and broadcast. So when we were originally doing this, it was audio content that was delivered via iPod or MP3 player. Let's talk about syndication because that's a part of RSS, which we'll get into in a second. With media syndication, what we mean is that this is how one piece of content is delivered to an entire network of people. So what that meant was that a reporter or a channel or a news organization that had a story, whether it was print or it was video or it was audio, they would send it to that wire desk, that wire service, and the wire service would then distribute it. And then it would be consumed by the subscribers of all of the different places. So if you worked for a media outlet, you would collect information from the wire and you would put it in your own publication, right? For TV, prior to streaming a local show, if it was syndicated, that meant that it was picked up by local stations all over the country. So Oprah Winfrey recorded and broadcast from Chicago. You could watch her from anywhere all over the world and all of the local things. That's what syndication is. But today, kids, this is not the way people consume media. And that's significant, right? It is still the way that broadcast and cable channels and I guess also newspapers deliver content. It's the way they collect it and the way they deliver it. But things like satellite streaming and direct-to-consumer delivery of information, YouTube, Sirius, Spotify, those are the three big players in my mind. For example, you subscribe directly to YouTube, you subscribe directly to Netflix, Sirius XM. There's nobody in between. There's nobody in between doing those things. And that has both a good and bad impact. The consumer is driving the ship. And that's a conversation for another day. A few minutes ago, I said that one of the arguments about what is a podcast is that it's an audio-only media product that had to be delivered by RSS, right? So the letters RSS have a meaning. Let's talk about what RSS means. It's a little confusing in 2025. It stands for really simple syndication. If I had a time machine, by the way, you guys, I would go back to the meeting where they decided that this is what it was going to be called because I imagine a conversation where one person says, hey, what does it do? And the other person says, oh, it syndicates. And the person said, okay, is it complicated? The other person says, no, it's simple. And let's call it simple syndication. Okay, well, that's not good enough. All right, then, smarty pants, what should we call it? Eureka, let's call it really simple syndication. So one of the reasons that the RSS only argument doesn't totally fly for me is because the history of RSS may not actually support it. It may have begun way before audio. I believe, based on my research, that it was developed to deliver text post feeds and PDF documents. And so this, back in the day, you would have a feed reader within your browser. My research says that in 1999, a guy named Dan Libby of Netscape, remember that? Probably not. That was a browser alternative to Microsoft Explorer. Remember that? Hopefully not. Geez. They called it the RDF site summary. And the idea was that you subscribe to the feed of another spot, and it would deliver that to you collected directly in your browser. I did this. I actually have memories of doing this. Anyway, it was a way of curating your browser homepage and the information that you got. It was a way of customizing the information that you got. And at some point, that was expanded out to audio. All right, so today, audio-only podcasts are still predominantly distributed using RSS. Ta-da! This is the way that podcast hosting companies deliver information to podcast players. So when you listen to audio-only podcasts, you do that through a player, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Cast. Spotify is a form of a podcast player, although it's confusing because it also does a bunch of other things. So those are podcast players, and the way they do that is they pull these RSS feeds. This is one reason that audio-only podcasts have an inherent searchability and discovery problem. This is something that people who are in the podcast space talk about a lot, and it's a topic for another day. I'm going to say that, but all I'll add today is that if you are somebody who is an indie podcast creator, somebody who's looking to create podcasts, and you're out there looking for an expert or a helper who's going to teach you how to do this, if they do not openly and honestly talk about the fact that this is a real and inherent struggle for podcasts, searchability and discoverability. If it was me, I would talk to somebody else, because there are people out there who are like, no, this is not a real problem. It is. It wasn't designed to do what we're doing with it today. So based on all of that, you probably can guess that I actually don't totally agree with the definition of a podcast being tied to an RSS player, or that it's currently limited and works for audio only content. I don't disagree with it either, is the other thing. Though. This is just my opinion, and you're totally welcome to disagree. I am not the podcast police or the vocabulary police. So I do think there is a description or a wording problem. I just really kind of think it's evolved a bit. Generally, for me as a person, Amy, I kind of think that words do change as concepts change. This doesn't bother me. This intersects with the reality that, consumers are changing the way they consume information. What the consumer considers to be a podcast shapes whether they think that what you are creating for them is for them or not. When people talk about this, one of the really fun things they say is they bring up the song lyrics, "Video killed the radio star." Emphasis on the word star, in my opinion. Video didn't kill radio. Radio still exists. What it killed was the radio-only star. And it didn't actually even kill that. There are still people who are huge profiles in the broadcast audio or radio business. I'll put this in a way that I think is more accurate and with more precision. In 2025, audio-only content, which is not just podcasts, this would also be audiobooks and anything else, but audio-only content can really truly be considered secondary consumption content. And sometimes this means the audio is stripped from a more comprehensive presentation like a video, like so you pull the audio and it's just delivered audio only. That content often sucks just because it wasn't meant to be audio first, but what I think it actually means is that when we listen to audio-only content, it is while we are doing other things. We listen to audio-only content while we're driving. We listen to audio-only content while we're traveling, while we're working out, while we're cleaning the house. It is something that we do when we are doing other things. If you go back in time, before there were primary video people, you would have found radio stars and live performing stars. But interestingly, we are currently living through another shift. Right? It's actually already happened. I think it's complete. The biggest stars today are not necessarily the Hollywood stars or the broadcast TV stars. They are streaming influencers, right? So without a doubt, the biggest, most influential people right now are streaming influencers. They're making more money. They have more reach than almost any other group at the moment, right? And within that, audio is a part of a digital streaming product. You can deliver audio with video, or you can deliver audio by itself. You can create long form content, short form content, medium form content. I'm not sure there's a difference in there. Truthfully, I think that forcing the question into this or that may really honestly miss the point. Creator and influencer, podcaster, all of those things. There's a lot of words. I'm not sure any of them work really well to describe most things. Digital creator is right now really heavily tied to people who are creating short form content on a variety of platforms. It's really directly attached to people who are doing product influencer type stuff. So that's kind of where that word hits at the moment. Today, for me, the word podcast is just not a great description of what a lot of people are doing. It's spot on for what some people are doing, but it's too broad and too unspecific. And at the same time, there's not another great word taking its place. You can call it a streaming talk show. Some people who are creating really innovative editorial work that is audio editorial. It's really, there's people doing amazing things out there. Are they podcasts? Does it matter? I don't know. But so there's two things I'm talking about here, the meaning of words and then how people actually consume this stuff. And I think those two things get mixed up. So let's talk about words, right? Because that's what I'm talking about, word podcast. What does it mean to podcast? There are people who think that one word should have the same meaning forever, right? That it should never, ever change. And there are other people that think that the meaning of words can and does change. True story, when I lived in France a million years ago, the dinosaurs roaming the earth, there was a French organization whose entire purpose was to protect French words. So like you had to say, they wanted you to say pommes frites instead of French fries. I don't know if that's still a thing. I happen to be in the second camp of people who believes that words change. They change with communities and with the way that we use them. I don't think there's a right or wrong here. I have respect for people who are trying to maintain the integrity of languages. One of my favorite stories about me and this is from several years ago. We were on vacation in Tulum, which is a beachfront town in Mexico. The story is that I walked up to a bar and I belly up to all these little like tea hut things that are right on the beach. And the bartender says to me, "Welcome, can I make you a bespoke cocktail?" And my mind went into meltdown. I was like, what? And he launched into an explanation of what he was doing. And I honestly felt like I had stepped out of my body and was body swapped with Mandy Patinkin in his character in The Princess Bride, which is one of the greatest movies ever, can we just say? But anyway, one of the lines he uses in the movie and his character is, "You keep using that word, and I don't think I don't think it means what you think it means." It's a plot line in Princess Bride. If you haven't ever seen the movie Princess Bride, you're missing out. It's fantastic. If you are a fan of Princess Bride, tell me your favorite one-liner from the movie. There are a lot. Anyway, I didn't say these things to the person that I was having the conversation with. They was just thinking them out loud because the word bespoke has a crazy specific definition. It refers to custom-made men's suits. Only suits. Not hats, not gloves, only suits. Custom made, not for women, only for men. Men's suits. That's all it means. A bespoke tailor makes custom men's suiting. Shirts, ties, pants, jackets. That's what it means. Look it up, right? I'll wait. Just kidding. No. Anyway, that's not how we use it today at all. Right? Every time somebody uses bespoke in another way, my mind takes a second to catch up because I have that old definition in mind. But today, the way we use it is just custom, and not even custom, like just artisan. That is how we use it. There are bespoke bakeries, bespoke bartenders, as here, bespoke craft shops, all of these things. We don't use the word in the way that it used to be used a long time ago. And so that's just a disconnect. The word has shifted, right? And I think that that's probably a version of what is happening with podcasting and streaming content and digital creating and all of those things. Just my opinion. The other thing is how we take in information, which may or may not have actually changed. A million years ago, when I had little kids, I was sitting in some school meeting for about something or another. What I remember is that the person who was giving the information was talking about the fact that people take in information. She was talking about students. They consume education in a variety of ways. Some people like to read things. Some people like to listen. Some people like to watch videos. Some are fine watching an example. Some need to try stuff themselves. I think that's true for everything. And I think that it blends out of school and into how we consume media. Some people will always choose video. Some people will like to read. Some people like to read an article that is a synopsis of a larger piece of content. Sometimes you want to listen to audio only. Sometimes you're going to want to listen to a direct interview. Sometimes you're going to look up a research paper instead of reading somebody else's interpretation of the reading paper, right? Sometimes you want a full sensory experience like an IMAX movie or a live performance. People still go to music festivals for days and days. And so thinking about that, thinking about the experience might be integral to understanding the context of this discussion. Like, what is a podcast in 2025? Does it make sense? What is TV? What is broadcast? What is video? What is creating? All of that stuff. An audio-only conversation may not be as engaging as a live stage performance, right? But that goes both ways. Sometimes you want that fully engaging, enmeshed, like overwhelming live performance. But the other times in your life, sometimes you want to be snuggled up by yourself on the corner of a couch reading a book and you don't want anybody else to talk to you, right? These things are different. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. And to score them and make it an either or, only this or that, is maybe not giving the conversation the weight or the value that is most helpful today. So what is a podcast in 2025? That's how I started. I'm not the person to define it, is where I am. Sorry. I just wanted to throw out my ideas and start the conversation on my platform. Before I close this out, I'm going to just add one more thing to this, which is based on the fact that this comes up in podcast forums and conversations on almost a daily basis. Like, if you're not in that space, you won't see this. And the question that's bouncing around in my mind is that if you zoom out enough, it becomes a bigger conversation. And you're talking about entertainment, you're talking about information delivery, you're talking about building an audience and a media channel. And with that bigger scene, the actual word podcast maybe doesn't matter as much. Podcasters sometimes try and claim the word audio, but that's not theirs. Audio isn't just words and conversations. It's also music, it's ambient sound, it's anything auditory. Audio production as part of a video or a movie is one of the most important storytelling elements that there is. Like, there's like a billion different pieces of it, but watching a scene from a show without the audio is completely different than when somebody does an excellent job of adding the audio in. So it's not just talk, right? Visual mediums aren't just video. They aren't just film. It's anything we see, right? So these binary absolute divisions at some point seek to like divide the conversation into components, and they maybe aren't always helpful. They are helpful when you're trying to like classify things, and at some point maybe have to classify things. I think we do get to a point, which is that if you have something that's quality, something that's worth saying, that is probably always more important than how you decide to deliver it. I do think that right now in 2025, we have a very practical problem in connecting individuals with information and entertainment that they want to see. The breakaway from big dominant broadcast networks has meant that the burden of finding information falls very much to the individual consumer. And that one of the easiest ways to see how this is broken down is how hard it can be to find local news within a community. I don't mean always news, right? Think about when, like, snow days and weather news. Where I live in Florida, we're talking about hurricanes, right? When everything was delivered through 5 network channels, you always knew that was where to go to get that information. These days, it's not delivered there. And some people don't even have access to that information, to those channels. People don't have broadcast at all in a lot of houses. And so it's harder to get that information. If I have my car radio tuned to a satellite station, which I do all the time, or Spotify, and when I turn on my TV, I go to a streaming organization, I don't necessarily see local news. And in fact, when I'm looking for hurricane news now, I go to NOAA. It's a simultaneous thing. Companies and brands and products, they are desperate to meet people who want to know about their services. And at the same time, people within communities are scratching their heads, like, where do I find a plumber in my community? Those two things, and it's not matching up. I think that's a small subset of where we are in this transition, and it'll work its way through, and I'm not going to be the person who figures it out. So what does a podcast and who does it serve? That's a teeny tiny subset of that bigger question of how do we give get, create, and consume information and entertainment. The AI technology has finally done something that people have been asking for a really, really long time, is that it has made some of the just back-breaking work of creating some of this stuff much, much faster. And so there's a lot more indie content coming out in bigger volume. There's a lot of crap coming out. There's a lot of false stuff coming out, all of that stuff. My speculation is that, and has been for a while, is that this will make live in-person stuff feel more important and more valuable, but that's just a guess on mine. Another guess about things that are happening in the creator space is that I think that the role of online communities is shifting. To wrap this up, which has gone on much longer than it ever should have, I started with the question of what is a podcast? And I'm going to end with this. What if what is a podcast as a question matters a lot? That's one possibility. But on the other hand, maybe it doesn't matter very much at all. And that's not helpful. That's a bunch of like word salad that doesn't even mean anything. And it's not going to get much better in my answer here, but I do think I have a different option here, a third option, which is potentially a tiny bit more helpful, right? Sometimes the actual answer to the question is not really the point. It's the work of asking the question and doing the work of, pursuing a variety of possible answers. And through that lens, the question of what is a podcast, is a great question. What is anything? What is media? What does broadcast mean in 2025? What does talk show mean in 2025? What does it mean to be an indie film creator in 2025? What are all of these things? I think that they might all have value, and they're worth asking, not to haggle over the specifics of the answers necessarily, like to pick one that is the winner, but the just process of picking away and having the conversations, that's the point. And that's worth doing. All right. Thanks for watching. Amy out.